Hello everyone and welcome to today's live where I'm going to be talking about stress and stress at perimenopause, stress at midlife, and why it is so important to deal with the way that we deal with what life throws at us to help us go through menopause in a much more grounded and less irritable and happier way. And I wanted to also talk about the fact that menopause is a completely natural process. It's not a deficiency disease like something like hypothyroidism or, diabetes, for example, where we don't have enough insulin. It is an entirely natural process. However, up until recently, we haven't been old enough, or we haven't got old enough in order to go through menopause until quite recently. And actually perimenopause is a relatively new term. It was only coined, 5 or 6 years ago. There is assumptions of the fact that the generation before us or women before us went through perimenopause with sort of having to hide a lot of symptoms, which is pretty awful. And I think now that the conversation is starting around menopause and the whole lead up to menopause is a very important one. But the problem is as well, the reason why, in my opinion, I think so many women struggle at perimenopause is because we are so stressed out. We're so strung out, much more than we were 25 years ago. My mother had me at 23. I'd gone through university. I was working by the time she went through menopause. Whereas nowadays, Generation X, as we are having children much later. For those of us who are having children, although, a fifth of us aren't having children anymore. But for those of us with children, we often have this kind of heady mix of teenagers in the house, which we wouldn't have done 25 years ago. Those baby boomers wouldn't have had to be going through that. Also, the generation before wouldn't have, it's wonderful, the suffragettes and the whole female rights movement, the fact that we are working now, that we are often at the top of our career. This is all brilliant. However, this is another spinning plate that adds to this extra stress at midlife, on top of dealing with elderly relatives and all the other sort of extra stresses that happen at this time. So our life has changed massively in terms of life load over the last 25 years. And then that's not even taking into account things like technology. And obviously technology is a brilliant thing, don't get me wrong, but it has completely untethered us from a 9 to 5 work. A lot of my clients are working with Asian clients in the morning and then working with America in the evening. And actually COVID, although it's been wonderful not having to commute for many of us, it has actually extrapolated out our workday for a lot of us, especially if we're working with overseas clients and other offices. So there is this huge problem when we enter this time of perimenopause, which is about hormone imbalances, not deficiencies, because actually estrogen can really spike at perimenopause as the body's desperate for us to reproduce again and again and again. But the problem is biochemically, these little glands called the adrenal glands sit on top of the kidneys, tiny little glands. They're very much involved with blood pressure. Actually, they produce something called aldosterone, which is why they're so close to the kidneys. But they are also in charge of kicking out cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline. Fine. Okay, so when we're stressed, those hormones are produced from the adrenals. But the problem is at perimenopause is that our adrenal glands are also our ovary backups. So they also produce a much weaker form of estrogen, and they also produce progesterone. So if we were living close to nature, much closer to nature than we are, we're so untethered from our natural rhythms, including perimenopause, unfortunately. And the reason being is that this cortisol, if we're very, very stressed, the body's like, I'm in fight or flight mode. I'm in survival mode. I cannot possibly use up important ingredients that could be used for making cortisol to make this progesterone and estrogen top ups the ovaries. And this is what the problem is. And this is why when I work with clients going through all of those kind of heady symptoms of perimenopause, working with our adrenal glands is definitely one of the many sort of ports of call for the prescription. So if our adrenal glands are in fight or flight mode, they will not be supplying the body enough of the backup hormones. A great quote by Ruby Wax in terms of mental health is that, the body is hardwired to survive. It doesn't give a shit about your happiness. And it doesn't give two hoots about your hormonal balance either. It's hardwired to survive over everything else. And this, in my opinion, is one of the reasons why we struggle so much. The other reason is that we are so, with our sort of stress load, cortisol is down-regulating lots of systems in the body, including the digestive system. So our digestive function starts to fade, starts to dip. And obviously our digestion is dipping anyway, the older we get. And then this means that even if your diet is nutrient dense, how many of those nutrients are actually getting in? So it has a knock-on effect. Also, if we're starting to get lots of stress, cortisol can actually lead to weight gain around the middle, the worry waist. And this causes more problems at perimenopause because it increases inflammation. It increases unhelpful estrogens in the body, which are more aggressive. But the body doesn't want to get rid of that central fat, however much cardio you do, however much calorie restriction you do, because it's producing these estrogens. So this is why stress resilience is so important at perimenopause. And I hate the word resilience. It's sort of, I don't know, it sort of makes you think, oh, I've just got to put up with this and try and dig deep. Well, no, I mean, a lot of what I'm doing with patients is doing things like my 2-week cleanse, which actually helps the body rewire, helps to reduce cortisol in the body by helping us to stop relying so much on stimulants, on sugar, on alcohol, on caffeine, all very legal substances, but they cause so much havoc in the body, and especially at perimenopause. And the reason being is that sugar, caffeine and alcohol all stimulate cortisol. So even though your stress might be relatively low, your internal stress is still really high. So that's why blood sugar handling is really important, because every time our blood sugar dips, cortisol, the stress hormone, is released to bring the blood sugar back up. So again, even if you're, everything's fine, you're living on your desert island, if only, you can still have a lot of internal stress. And if you have lots of blood sugar lows, signs of this are feeling shaky, faint, clammy, must eat now, hangry. This is when cortisol is stimulated to bring the blood sugar back up. Also, caffeine puts you into fight or flight mode. That's why if you have too much, your heart rate's going like this. It's jangling. You're in fight or flight, but the body can't tell that you're actually just still sat at your desk or in a traffic jam or whatever. The physiological reaction to that caffeine is the same. And then you get your blood sugar low after caffeine, which then means that you need more caffeine, more stimulants to bring yourself back up. And unfortunately for us, cortisol, our stress hormone, is also our anti-inflammatory hormone. And inflammation is a real problem, and it is related to stress, because the more cortisol we have in the body, the body starts to sort of batten down the hatches and say, no, I don't need any more cortisol, and then inflammation, our immune system goes on hyperdrive. So you might be finding that you're becoming more sensitive to alcohol, getting sneezing after alcohol, or getting hay fever, or things like eczema, or very dry skin. Eczema basically means to boil over. It's inflammation of the skin. But if you've got that weight round the middle, that's also creating extra inflammation. So that's another area. So coming back to those adrenal glands, we want to nourish the adrenal glands so that the body can deal with what life throws at us. We're living in we're living so far away from nature. And that's why, I'm very much a complementary practitioner. Don't feel any guilt if you need to take HRT. Seriously, just do what you need to do, because we're up here, whereas actually naturopathically we need to be down here. But our world's not like that, is it? However, there is a lot that you can do naturally, or even if you are on HRT, complementary routes will help. Dealing with our adrenal glands. So what do our adrenal glands need? Well, every time we are stressed, we need vitamin C, and the adrenals really need a steady supply of vitamin C. So we don't store Vit C. We're the only mammal, apart from monkeys, the monkey families, and guinea pigs, bizarrely, that don't store vitamin C. And actually, anthropologically, that's because we have bigger brains, like the primates. Don't know about the guinea pigs, they lost out there. But we have bigger brains, which anthropologically, the research suggests that would mean that we can actually select more berries, etc., when we're feeling like we need more vitamin C. So the more stressed you are, the more Vit C you need. So do invest in a juicer. I have a very reasonable juicer from Philips. It was like 69 quid. But having juices really help to sort of flood your body with vital vitamin C. And certainly if you're low on energy as well, that will really help. But other things the adrenals need is lots of protein. And actually, we don't store protein in the body. And if you're really stressed, cortisol is very catabolic. It's breaking stuff down in the body. Whereas I'm always working to help patients get into anabolic rest and digest. So we need proteins. Protein is the building block of the body, protein is the building block of lean muscle mass. But protein also helps our adrenal glands, and it helps your blood sugar handling as well. So making sure protein-rich foods in every meal and snack. B vitamins are very important. B vitamins are so important if you suffer with anxiety, wired and tired, if you're anything to do with the nervous system, basically. B vits are really, really useful. So a good B complex, lots of oats, chicken, the white poultry, really good source of B vits, eggs. So I just, with adrenal health, it's about helping to reduce the need for so much cortisol. And then the body can think, okay, well, I can then start making the weaker form of estrogen and progesterone to top up the body. Remember, at perimenopause as well, if you're having very long cycles, so your cycles have become extrapolated out, which they do in sort of the second stage of perimenopause, this can actually mean that you're not ovulating. And if we don't ovulate, we won't make any progesterone. So the progesterone comes from the little sac that's created after ovulation called the corpus luteum. And progesterone is really important for anyone suffering with anxiety. It's often called the everything will be okay hormone. It directly links to a brain chemical called GABA, which is very calming to the body. So if you're having all these long cycles, the body might often still be stimulating estrogen, going, come on, estrogen, come on, ovaries, ping out that egg. So we might still be getting estrogen, but we won't be making the progesterone, which is why those adrenals are so important as our backups. So I would say, don't have any guilt about how you're going through perimenopause. If your mother went through it, fine. I always do with my clients a stress test before they come and see me. And I never forget giving it to my mother to do. And she was desperately trying to sort of tick some of the stress events. I think she got such a low score because that generation just were not as stressed. They didn't have two salaries, for a partnership to go towards a mortgage. And as I say, we're having their kids much younger. So remember, as women, we're living this very male pattern of life still, where we have to peel off in our sort of 20s and 30s usually now, isn't it? And early 40s even, to have children if we're having children. Then we have to come back into the workplace, working even harder than the men to sort of justify our position again. And then we get, I work a lot with women who are C-suites and suddenly they're around the boardroom table and their brain can't think, they can't process information suddenly. And then they lose a lot of confidence and then they leave work. So menopause, to me, perimenopause, it is a women's rights issue. We need to start talking about it more, and certainly in companies and corporations as well. So I would say, even if you're early 30s listening to this, start to cycle track, start to work out what's going on with your cycle so you can actually stay one step ahead of heightened stress or heightened cortisol. And certainly if that latter part of the cycle is usually when progesterone is dipping, which causes extra anxiety and craving for stimulants, no energy, cravings for sugar, which then affects our cortisol. So there's lots that you can do to help reduce the need for cortisol internally so that then you can deal with whatever life throws at you. If you're like a coiled spring, if you're like, and then something stressful happens, you will often react in a very stressful, irritated way. Whereas actually, if you're down here, if you feel that deep-seated sense of contentment, in an ideal world. However, if you wake up in the morning and think, okay, I'm ready for today, then when those stresses come down on you, you can actually deal with them in a much more reasoned way. And I think, menopause change is good, and actually it allows us as women to stop and actually think, okay, I can't actually go at the pace I was in my 20s and 30s. I have to change. And I'm hoping that, that conversation with partners will all be positive ones, because I think we are multitaskers. We are so amazing. But I think when our hormones start to fluctuate like this, we need to build in some self-care. So I hope that was useful. I'll post this up, and any questions, just let me know. But in my opinion, a lot of this comes down to our adrenals and to stress. And obviously there's other amazing things that you can put into place for self-care, like mindfulness and meditation and, exercise, even staring out of a window with a wide gaze or doing breath work, or even just being out in nature and just breathing, just being conscious of standing with your feet, feeling grounded on the earth. The Epsom bath salts are amazing as well for relaxation, getting that magnesium through the skin to help calm us, especially if you're dealing with anxiety. However, from a biochemical perspective, helping support those adrenal backups really do help on many levels. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.